welcoming Mike Dexter as our last speaker this year. Next year we'll start off a whole new series in the spring. We do these spring, summer, and fall, and you can look forward to that. We put the word out as best we can, but you can always call us. You can like us on Facebook and keep up with us if you are on Facebook. But without further ado, Mike Dexter is going to be telling us all about the Waterworks. Thank you, Mike.
I'm Mike Dexter. I've been associated with the Cortland Water Board and Water Department since 1972 when I was hired by Grover Eaton as a meter reader. My main job at the Waterworks when I was first hired was to read meters. I did that 6 months out of the year. Other times I was repairing meters. I can tell you when I first started working over there, I just stayed out of the way because there were some older guys that really scared me, made me nervous anytime I was around them. So I tried to do my job the best I could. I was hired in 1972, as I said, and before I go any farther, there are a couple people that I would like to acknowledge because I'll probably forget if I get farther into my talk. One of them would be a gentleman named Danny Houlihan, who some of you may remember, who worked at the Water Board from 1922, starting out as a meter reader until 1971 when he passed on. He happened to marry my mother, so he was my stepdad for about 6 months before he had a massive heart attack and died. But he wasn't on the job. The second person I want to acknowledge is my sister Mary, who you all know, Mary from the Historical Society. Mary is the one who did the history of the Cortland Water Works Company and the Cortland Water Board in 1977. She was a city historian at the time, and she did it as part of a New York State historian's theme, Water Notable and Potable. She's the one that put this book together, which is where I pull a lot of the history out of the Cortland Water Company, which started in 1884. It was the predecessor of the Cortland Water Board. I will get into talking a little bit about the history of that. But Danny was somebody who did a lot of things at the Water Board. He made it more than just a utility company. He made it flowers, he made it animals, he made it Christmas lights. He's the one that instituted all of the things that you see today at the Water Board. A little bit of history of the Cortland Water Works Company. The earliest settlers found water abundant in the creeks and springs as well as in the Cuyahoga River, which traverses the county north to south. Its two major branches meeting where the corporate limits of the city of Cortland seldom found standing still adequate supplies of water turned mill wheels to produce flour, lumber, oil, cider, and cloth. Due to the geological formation of the valley floor, glacial outwash deposits of sand and gravel on the bed of clay, there was an outstanding potential for retention of large quantities of water, much of it relatively close to the surface. To throw that in there, we have what was called the Otter Creek, Dry Creek Aquifer. Most communities around us, nobody in Cortland County, but Syracuse, Ithaca, Binghamton take their water out of a surface water supply, either out of Skinny Atlas Lake, Lake Ontario, Owasco Lake, Cayuga Lake for Ithaca. So we have a groundwater supply. Shallow wells less than 30 feet proved to be adequate source of water for the residents of a small settlements which sprang up on the broad plain at the confluence of 7 valleys beginning in the last decade of the 18th century. By 1853, growth of the population, 1,259 people in the village of Cortland, basically. It wasn't a city at that time. The main group of people that were living here were down on the Port Watson. That's where it was settled because of the river. You had people coming up and down the Cuyahoga River who were traveling anywhere from Syracuse, probably from the Erie Canal, down through Binghamton. One of the first matters of the village business is reported to have been adoption of a resolution that an engineer be employed to take level of Otter Creek to ascertain if the water could be made more available to the use of the village. It was determined that the creek bed lay 3 feet above the level of the sidewalk at the Cortland House corner of Main and Groton Ave. But the matter was laid over for at least 20 years. They weren't very quick to act back then. They had water, they were happy with what they had, they didn't really look too far to the future. In the early 1870s, the village fathers are recorded to have concerned themselves with the possibility and necessity of a public water supply. The state legislature, upon request, named 5 persons in 1873 as the water commissioners for the village of Cortland, and it was their duty to consider those matters related to the supplying the municipality with water. A special election held in May proposing that a tax be imposed to raise the funds necessary to supply the village with water was rejected by the voters. They were very happy with their own private wells rather than going on a community water system. However, the trustees in 1877 expended over $6,000, which was 15% of the annual budget, in an effort to provide for better fire protection. 6 fire wells were put down within the village limits, 1 each at the following intersections: Main and Court, Grand and North Main, Union and South Main, Tompkins and Owego, East Court and Greenbush, Church Street and Mill Street, which is now Clinton Ave. The establishment of a public water supply, as it is known today, commenced in 1883, when a group of 14 village residents organized and submitted an application to the village trustees to form a Waterworks company for the purpose of supplying pure and wholesome water to the village of Cortland and its inhabitants, by taking water from the springs upon the east branch of the Otter Creek. Involved in this proposal venture included, these were some of the movers and shakers back in the 1800s. You historical people probably will know some of these people as I read off their names. Edward M. Cater, William Shanklin, Charles Parker, Burnett Miller, Horace Kellogg, Joseph Eggleston, Charles Bull, James Skimmerhorn, Seaman Bull, Strobridge, Benjamin Taylor, Doris Smith, and Abraham Skimmerhorn. On the 19th of January in 1884, the Secretary of State issued a certificate of incorporation to the Cortland Waterworks Company. That would be this Waterworks Company right here. That was the first plant built in the city to supply water to the village, to the people in the city. This is Broadway right here. The pump house used to sit right at the end of the pond where we feed the ducks and the animals today. This is the pump house. This is the pond over here. As you can see in this picture, at that time, all they had was a snow fence out there to protect. The water that you see in the pond today was actually used to drink. It flowed into this pump house right here and was put into the system. The problem being that they could only get 40 or 50 pounds out of it because there was no elevation to the water tanks. This house that you see right here is a house that still exists today on the corner of New Big Road and Broadway. It's now owned by the college. I'll jump ahead a little bit, but not with pictures, but to let you know, that house was moved when they built the pump house that's there now, the existing pump house. That house was moved down to Kellogg Road, and it was owned by the water company. Danny Houlihan lived in that house for 25 or 30 years before he died, and then the water board sold it to a private company, or a private person. The college was at one time living there. But as you can see, the water in the pond flowed into the pump house and then flowed out into the system. So there wasn't a whole lot of head behind it to get a lot of pressure. Officers of the company were elected in February, included James Eggleston, a lawyer, president, Charles Parker, vice president, Edward Cater, a cashier at the First National Bank, secretary, and J.S. Bull, cashier at the Second National Bank, as treasurer. Stock valued at $100,000 was issued. On March 18th, the village election saw a proposition presented to the electorate to raise $2,000 a year for the rental of 40 fire hydrants within the city for the Cortland Waterworks Company. The proposal carried 386 to 225, and so the company's first customers were lined up. Basically, they were fire hydrants. They weren't giving water to anybody, but they were putting water into the system for fire protection. Initially, there was one pump. We're still, this is a certificate issued by the state for when the Cortland Water Company, Cortland Waterworks was initiated in, 1884. So that's when this pump house became in service, and they started pumping water out into the village. Why don't you just go ahead and see what the next picture brings up. Okay, this is an overhead shot of the Cortland Waterworks and the land that is owned. You can see right here, this is the pump house. This is Prospect Terrace, coming down off the hill. At one time, it came all the way down to Broadway. But you couldn't take a right on Broadway. That's why today, when you drive down to the end of Broadway, you see Otter Creek and Townley Ave. That street wasn't there when this was built. Prospect Terrace came down, and then everybody had to go this way over to Tompkins Street. This is Water Street right there, which is connected. Obviously, this is all college today. But you can see over here, there's Townley Ave, and Otter Creek became going down the other way where a lot of these houses aren't there now. The guy that lived in this house right here, his name was Michael Sheridan. He was on hand when the first pump house was built and had charge of the equipment from the time the project was in infancy until 1929. He was an employee of the Cortland Water Department for 45 years. I just passed him last year. I'm working on Danny right now. With customer satisfaction in mind, a telephone connection was set up from the main business office on Main Street over the First National Bank, which is now Jones Jewelry, to the pump house as soon as business commenced. On a night when there was a fire, the call was placed to Mr. Sheridan, who then ran to the pump house from the house out back, we didn't have to run very far, and started the pump. He worked for more than 30 years by himself as a company plant engineer, and he also assisted with maintaining the Homer Village water supply, which went into operation 1 year later. For a time, he walked between the two locations, which is Cortland Waterworks to Newton Waterworks in Homer. That was his job, walking back and forth and running both pumps. Giving half a day to each pump house. His routine found him at the Cortland station from 4 in the afternoon until 10 at night. A bit of public relations is found in a November 1884 newspaper item relative to water being piped to the Messenger House located at the southeast corner of Main and Port Watson, where there is now the restaurant is. Pure spring water furnished by the Cortland Water Company is on every floor, water used for all purposes and pronounced pure and decidedly wholesome, superior to the hard lime water obtained from the bored wells. All who have been introduced to this improvement in their residences speak very highly in its favor, and it is believed that in the not too distant future, driven wells in this village will be entirely abandoned and water furnished by the water company. While I was reading meters, one of the things, we still had people in the city who were on private wells. A couple of them were down on North Street, there was one on East Ave. The health department didn't get involved until mid-70s to tell everybody, if there's a public water supply within 100 or 200 feet, you have to get on the city's water supply. So we had people in the city in the 1970s that were still taking water out of a well within the city limits. For a time in 1886, the water company and the village found themselves in a controversy over the hydrant rental, and as a result, the company chose to lock the hydrants to prevent their use at fires and to shut off major mains entirely at night. Village facilities went without piped water for several months before the matter was compromised, but the situation brought to the fore those in the village who supported the idea of the municipality going into the water business. You got to understand that there's still a village back then, so this little water company had control of the water system. The city of Cortland, which was incorporated in 1900, still didn't have control of their own citizens to be able to get water. As an apparent result of the problems that arose that year before the village of Cortland and the Cortland Waterworks Company entered into a formal contract agreement in April of 1887 calling for the construction by the company at its own expense, extended and enlarged mains within 1 year, adding 71 first-class double delivery non-freezing hydrants, bringing the total number of village hydrants to 120. We now have about 550 hydrants in the city, at the annual rental rate of $33.33 each. The agreement also called for supplying water without charge to the public buildings of the village, including the fire department rooms, public schools, except the state normal, training school, 3 public drinking fountains for people and animals situated on Main Street at Clinton Ave, Court Street, and on the corner near the Standard Block, and water to wash out, clean, and flush sewers. A long time ago, there were lines into the sewer lines, so they had to flush the sewer lines out because there wasn't enough to get it to wherever they wanted to take it, so they were hooked into the city's water supply, which is not a real good idea. The last item was the cause of the water company to subsequently serve notice of a breach of contract on the Village Board of Sewer Commissioners in November 1896, requesting that the use of water be confined to the amount required per contract. Apparently some people were using some water and they were getting away with it without being charged. and they were put on notice that during the past year a large quantity of water was used which the Waterworks company considered excessive and wasteful. Benjamin Taylor, active throughout the life of the company, assumed the position of superintendent of the Cortland Water Company in 1889, continuing until 1906 in that capacity, at which he was succeeded by J.P. Gray. Control of the company was acquired in 1891 by L.J. Fitzgerald and B.F. Taylor when they bought 600 shares of stock held by Moffett, Hodgins, and Clark of Syracuse, New York, adding to the 150 shares they already held. You got to remember, this was a private company. They were just trying to make money for themselves. They weren't really worried about pumping water to the rest of the city. It was a company, and they were sold stock, so they were trying to make money on this. Cortland continued to industrialize, and the population continued to grow. Early in the 1900s, the village saw and was granted the status of the city of Cortland, 1900. In 1901, the heirs of the Horace Dibble sold and relinquished and abandoned all water rights which Dibble had to use to convey water from Otter Creek for manufacturing purposes at their woolen or carding mill on North Main Street. The water company's revenues and patronage steadily increased after the turn of the century, a primary reason apparently being the installation of a sewer system installed at the public expense of $75,000 by the young up-and-coming city of Cortland. The popular demand was for improved methods of sanitary conditions. With the franchise due to expire in April of 1907, the supporters of the municipal-owned utilities pressed the issue at every opportunity. They wanted to get in the water business to be able to sell water to their citizens now that we're a city. They didn't want to deal with some private company who was in it just to make money. They were looking not only in the Cortland Waterworks Company, but in electric and telephone services as well. Such matters were complicated procedures, and this was compounded by some very vocal, prominent opposition. Committees were formed, public hearings were held, and extension was given to the water company until the matter of whether or not the city of Cortland should go into the water business could be solved legally. The Cortland Water Board was created by a separate act of the state legislature in July of 1907 and empowered to investigate the value of its existing water company plant. This is the beginning of the Cortland Water Board. The city decided they're not going to deal with us, we're going to go to the state legislature and we're going to create a Cortland Water Board, which is when it was a separate act of the state legislature. And I can tell you over the years, the city was always trying to get into the water business. The commissioners and the chairman of the board were appointed by the mayor, but they had no control over the water board. The water board basically was in business to sell water cheaply and good water to the customers in the city of Cortland. Everybody always thought that the water board had this millions of dollars in the bank. We had enough money to make the waterworks work. But the city always felt that you got more money than you need. That's a whole other story. I can tell you some comments that were made by city officials that thought we had all this money, that they thought that the money that we had in our bank should be in their bank. The board also retained the power, whenever authorized by popular vote, to effect one of the following alternatives: to take the existing plant by condemnation, to purchase the existing plant at an agreed price, or to build a new waterworks for the city. One of the ideas that was thought about was going down on the other end of the city where we talked about the Tiafanioga earlier. The Cooper factory was down there. They had a water supply in the Tiafanioga. The city said, you don't sell it to us at a decent price, we will go down the other end of the city and be in competition with you. Examining the experience of other cities, notably Ithaca and Malone, who were involved in taking over existing water plants by condemnation, led the water board to reject that alternative. The water company's consultant, Alan Hazen of New York City, placed the value at $350,000, while Mr. Herring's valuation was set at $221,000. He was working for the city. Large difference credited to the intangible value of the existing water company, which the company claimed to be superior in certainty, accessibility, economy of delivery and distribution, as well as the already established patronage. The board considered the water company asking price excessive and declared to even submit the matter to the electors for consideration. It appeared for a short time that the only viable alternatives was to go into the water business. To accomplish this, the required electorate to vote favorably for consent to build such a works, and the maximum price be estimated to be $250,000. A year passed with no formal action taken by the Water Board. In June of 1908, however, the Water Company, represented by T.H. Wickwire, E.H. Brewer, came forward with a compromise offer of $300,000. The controversy peaked at this time, the major question being considered, thoroughly discussed at every turn. Would the water take less of the city held out? Would condemnation really cost more in the long run? Would a new plant be able to keep its financial head above water? Was the whole matter just political maneuvering in favor of affluent and prosperous at the expense of the taxpayer? Would delay in purchasing the existing plant at $300,000 only be putting off the inevitable, which could then cost twice as much in the near future? The city was already paying nearly $7,000 annually to the Cortland Water Company for water for public purposes. It was nearly 2 more years before the city of Cortland actually went into the water business. The date of transfer of ownership was scheduled for January 3rd, 1910, but there was added delay and the warranty deed was not given until May 2nd of 1910. The Cortland Water Board of the city of Cortland, whose authority was established by a separate act of the state legislature, has continually overseen and management of the public waterworks to this day. In 1910, they established rules and regulations, which some are still in effect, and I know that because I brought this copy. I've got copies of the original book. It's about this size right here. It gives all the rules and regulations. Some of them are still in effect because a few years ago when the city was going to put new streets down, they told the people that they had to replace their water services. The people said, they're not ours, you replace it. Well, that's not true because the rules and regulations of the Cortland Water Board still were in effect. They've never been changed. So they told those people, when your house was built, the city did not put a water line into your house. It was contracted. So that water line that's going into your house actually belongs to you. So on my street in particular, on Cedar Street, the people said, well, I'm not paying to put a new service in. The city said, okay, we're going to pave the street. When your service begins to leak, then you will have to replace it. Most of the services in the city of Cortland today, probably 90% are copper services. They used to be iron pipe. Today they're all copper. In 1977, I'll jump ahead and I'll finish most of the history. In 1977, there was approximately 60 miles of water mains in the distribution system, excluding the Cortlandville district, which, up until the TCE scare back in 1986, when Smith Corona had the TCE in the water and contaminated our water system, the city of Cortland supplied a good share of Cortlandville with water. Groton Ave Shopping Plaza, the houses out on Tompkins Street, Miller Street Extension when you go up the hill, any place that was in, because Cortlandville did not supply water any farther than where they are out on the town hall, and they have a well out on that road where and back of Smith Corona, that's where the contamination came from. So at that particular time, it was said that they were going to start supplying their own people with water. So that's when we got out of the business, and basically we just supply water to the city, the residents in the city now. Why don't you go ahead with the pictures, Kate? We'll talk long enough on that. These are the first 2 standpipes that were built. This pipe was built turn of the century, as you can see. This part was the original. They added 15 more feet on when they built the second tank. I think that's probably Danny in the background back there. These 2 tanks hold a total of 2.5 million gallons of water. The problem with these standpipes is that once the pressure got down to, they hold 55 feet, once it got down to 55 or 50 feet, then you would see the water pressure in the city drop, because that's what maintains the fire hydrant pressure in the city. Most people think that up on the hill you'd have more water pressure. You have less pressure because there's no head behind it. Bosse's down at the other end of the town has about 95 pounds of pressure because it's the farthest away. Go ahead, Kate. This is when the trees were planted, when it was forested over at the Waterworks. A lot of the trees that you see there today were put in back in the 1920s and 1930s by the, it was a, what was it?
CCC.
CCC. They planted a lot of the pine trees that are over there now. Okay. This, at one time, they used to ice skate on the upper pond at the Waterworks. This is a picture back in the 1930s. They used to clean it off. They had water in there for the most part because they weren't pumping that much water. So it usually would freeze over in the wintertime. They also had a fire hydrant out here in the street where they could flood it when it didn't have enough water. As you can see, there's a little house back here for people that were ice skating. They could go in the house. They probably had a little bonfire in there. But just looking at the cars, it's in the 1930s. Okay. This was the original steam engine that was in the pump house. after they stopped pumping it from the pump house, which was out front, the pump house was built in 1920. This Worthington steam engine was put in the pump house in 1935 when, or actually it was put in there when the pump house was built in 1920, and it was, the pump that came after that was the first electric pump, which was in 1935. This would be what was considered in my meter room over at the Waterworks. The whole back of the pump house, this steam engine sat on that piece of concrete in the back. These are the windows, if you drive out back, these windows are still there. It's the same windows, they just changed them a little bit.
Coal-fired?
Pardon?
Coal-fired?
Yes.
Yeah.
There was a smokestack. They had a little coal bin out back. If you look at the pump house today, you can see where the coal was got because the difference in the color of the building by the back door. Okay. This was the smokestack that was for the steam engine. This right here was the first dug well on the property when they stopped pumping water out of the pond. This well right here is well number one. It's what's considered as a shallow well. It's only about 20 feet deep. The advantage to pumping out of the shallow wells, you didn't have to bring the water up 50 feet. So it was a lot cheaper. Up until 1981, 1982, we used that shallow well. But in that time, we had a big flood, and water was coming in from the top. So the health department said, if you're going to continue using this, because the only thing we put in the water today is chlorine, we would have had to put chemicals in it, and the city didn't want to go to a treatment plant. So we abandoned this and sunk another deep well out back. This is still used for water temperatures and the amount of water that's in the ground. The stack didn't come down until the 40s or early 50s. This is a picture of Danny on one of the starting panels in 1925. Maxon, Chase, Danny, a lot of Tichenor, Corcoran. A lot of the important people were always attached to the Cortland Water Board. Go ahead. Another picture of the plant back in 1930. This is the sluiceway. This is the overrun from the pond when there's more water in the pond than it can hold. This is the sluiceway that runs down into Otter Creek. That was built just for that purpose, to drain the pond, or keep the water flowing out of the pond. This is a picture of Broadway looking back along the snow fence that I told you about earlier. This is the upper pond. That's the lower pond, probably looking back. It looks like, I don't know exactly. Go ahead. This is the grounds when, I guess I wasn't the groundskeeper back then for some reason. It looks to be rather overgrown, but that's what they wanted back then. But
wow.
They did hire a gardener in 1958 when Danny was working over there. This is the first swimming hole in the city of Cortland. With the warm weather of the last few days, prospective bathers will be interested to learn of the work that has been done at the bathing and swimming pool at the Cortland Waterworks. A new bathhouse has been built with dressing rooms and for men and women. Concrete steps have been put in. It wasn't more than 4 or 5 feet deep. It was down where the walking bridge is, that we go over the crossover from Broadway over to Melvin or Belrose. That's where the swimming hole was. You can see over here, this is the hill. That's Broadway out there. That's 1932. That's an oversight of the Waterworks. This is the water plant. That's the upper pond. This is Broadway going all the way around. This is all land that was acquired over the years by the Cortland Water Board as part of the aquifer. It's the Dry Creek, Otter Creek Aquifer. Not really sure what that picture is, except I'm thinking that that's a picture of Danny, that it may have been when Chris Kraft came in town, if anybody remembers when Chris Kraft came.
Yeah.
They built the plant down on the other side of the Tappanioga. They had no water supply. They dug a pipe underneath the Tappanioga to get Chris Kraft to come to town because they needed a water supply. I think this is probably Morris Noss over here, who was very, very involved industrial back then in bringing people to Cortland. Okay. This is a fishing contest that the DEC held back in the 1940s. This is Broadway after it was opened up. This house right here is being constructed. That's where Lorraine Sherry and Bill Sherry's house is. That was built about in the late 1940s. They just had a fishing contest. They would stock it with fish, and people would come and pull the fish out. This was the first Christmas at the Waterworks, the first year that the Christmas lights were put up in 1949. Kind of basics. We used to put the fireplace over here until the doors had to open out, and that's why the fireplace is on the other side. That's the first tree, but I don't think it's a planted tree. This might be a planted tree. At that particular time, they just put wires on it to put a tree out front. That's a picture back in the 1970s when we were still using some of the things that we wouldn't be able to use today.
That's when they
Not-
restarted the lights.
Not to mention, what's that?
Isn't that when they put the lights
That's when we came, yes. 1978 was the year, we had no Christmas lights at the Waterworks for about 5 years because of the energy crisis. If you remember, everybody was discouraged from using Christmas lights. So the Christmas lights were put up in the attic and stored for 5 years. I went to one of the commissioners one year, Dana Morgan, who was a friend of mine, and said, Dana, we either ought to put them back up or get rid of them. They're going to rot up in the attic. So 1978 was the first year that we put lights back up. They'd be better off leaving the lights up at the Waterworks and telling everybody else not to put lights up, but they just discouraged everybody from putting lights up. This is an older picture of the Waterworks. That's the first tree that they planted, which we took down in 1991 because it got too big. That's another oversight view of the Waterworks. Plants here, the Waterworks owns land all the way out. This used to be farmland. If you remember, this was a Gedman farm over here. That's the overhead door right there. The Gedman farm is where the football fields and where the PER building is right now. That goes all the way out to 281. We also own land on the other side where the trees are. They acquired land over the period of time because that's where the Aquifer comes down by Elm Tree Golf Course, comes down 281 and goes through the Waterworks and ends up down at the top of the Otter from the Dry Creek, Otter Creek Aquifer. This was the first, this was the motor, the engine that they put out back. This was well number 4. And the story goes, this is Joe Wakula here. That's Mel Pierce. I think that might be Del Wilsey right there. That was a diesel. It was a diesel engine, but they made it electric. And back in Y2K, if you remember the year 2000, when everybody thought we were going to lose electricity and gas, they converted this back to a diesel engine. We never had to use it because Y2K never developed. But that's the well that's out back. That's the most productive well we have right now. That can pump about 4,500 gallons a minute.
Wow.
The story on that was that they needed to sink another well, and back then in the 50s, they used water witches. The story was that Danny went out back, the water witch said, here's the place to dig the well right here. And it's been productive ever since then.
Great.
That's Joe in the same engine. This is part of the cross-country skiing that they do in the wintertime out at the Waterworks. It's not quite as nice as it used to be because they went in and forested a lot of the trees. It's not quite as pristine as it used to be. Plus the storm of 1986 knocked down a lot of trees and they really haven't reforested like they should have. These are the pillars before they were replaced back in the 1980s. They were tipping because, as you can see, there's no sidewalk. It was just asphalt. People continually ran into the brick pillars, except they were solid. You didn't knock them over very often because they were made of concrete. They did replace them. This is the blowdown in 1986. If you all remember the wind shear that came through town and devastated the airport, came down 81, devastated the Waterworks, went down Tompkins Street. We had 16 deer. Everybody was concerned about the deer at that particular time. We had 16 deer, but we fed them every day. The deer all came back, so by the time we put the fence back up, we still had 16 deer. They didn't go very far away. This is what we tried to do when we rebuilt the sidewalk where you feed the animals. This was the old pump house where the water flowed in. This was one of the openings that went into the pump house. So when we rebuilt the sidewalk many years ago, we tried to maintain the integrity of that same. Today, it fell apart. They've got pilings in there just to keep the rest of it from falling in. This, as you all remember, Smith Corona, the TCE scare. We built an airstripper to take care of the TCE that they said was coming down the road within 10 to 12 months. Fortunately, it never materialized. We built this at a no-bid contract. It took 2 years. If we were going to get the TCE in the water, we never would have had this thing ready because of all the regulations we had to go through. They're in the process that someday of moving this out back. It's kind of a white elephant. It's there. It does serve a purpose, except it's never been run since 1986 for what it was built for, which is TCE, radon, gasoline spills. Okay. Danny Houlihan, the plaque that's out front, was put in his memory back in 1971. That's his sister, Grace. She was there the day that we had our first water fair. Okay. This is the house that I talked about. This is the house that sits in the back of the Waterworks, which is moved over to Broadway right now, which the college owns. That's the water plant before the tree was taken down. This is Mr. Dexter giving somebody a tour. Oh, actually, this is my niece, Cassidy. They came over for a tour. The one good thing about it, if you've been in the pump house, all the pipes that were there that were abandoned in 1981, they're still there. They don't serve a purpose, other than that's the only thing we can explain to what that used to be. The water used to come out of that shallow well, go in here and go out to the street. The pipes are still there. This is a gas engine. In case the electric motor on this one quit, the gasoline engine would be put in service. Okay. Deer at the Waterworks. This was a deer that lived there for 18 years. His name was Charlie. He was featured in several magazines.
He's coming up in the, oh, very
He was put on a calendar. He lived to be 18 years old. We do have a display of 15 years worth of antlers off the same deer. These are deer that were born at the Waterworks. One day I was out there, she was having fawns. One of the fawns ended up in the pond.
Oh, gosh.
Mike had to go to the rescue. As you can see, I'm here, there's both fawns. I was getting here, over here, she was dropping the second fawn. That's why she wasn't too worried about what was going on in the pond. A lot of people will tell you don't handle deer. Well, it was either let her drown or take her out of the water. Mom was okay. I went out in the Waterworks lately because a lot of people say the bucks don't care too much, Dad doesn't care too much. Well, I realized after I was out in the deer pen the following Monday that Dad did care about what was happening to one of his babies. He gave me a little, time for you to leave. Okay.
Go.
This was a deer that somebody raised over in Groton for 2 years. They brought her to the Waterworks. They couldn't take care of her anymore. Her name was Dawn. That's why they will tell you not to bring animals home. What happened to her was she was imprinted with the personalities of people. That's why she's as friendly as she is. The other deer didn't like her, except when it came to the rutting season that following fall. She became impregnated. First time she ever had babies, she had 3.
Oh, my God.
That's the same. These are the 3 babies that she had. One died within a week, which would have happened out in the wild. The 2 that survived, one was either going to be Sam or Samantha. The other one was going to be Joe or Joanna. Samantha turned out to be Joe. All these antlers down here are off Sam. Samantha turned out to be Sam. This was the last year that Sam was with us, because I went in one Christmas and 2 of the bucks were doing battle. I didn't think too much about it. Went into a second rut. I came back out. Sam was on the ground. The younger buck twisted his neck, broke his neck. Because these antlers were all off the same deer, I said I would like the antlers. So they said, well, we'll saw them off. I said I'd rather they stayed. So they left them right on the skull plate. It's a lot easier for show and tell than to hold 2 antlers up. Go ahead. There are a couple papers up here that kind of list all of the people that work for the Waterworks, and there's a lot of movers and shakers in Cortland back at that time when you're talking about Henry Corcoran, Grove Maxson, George Brockway, who sat on the board for 30 years, Fred Titchener, Hollister, Crockers, Dexter Place, Walter Ford, Justin Corcoran, Fred Titchener, John Fitzgerald, Reed McJunkin, Dana Morgan, Dr. Spiker, Dr. Rhodes, Tom Gallagher, Larry Wright. I don't know how Bud wasn't able to get on the water board. He must have been asked. Were you ever asked, Bud?
I was never asked. No.
Never asked.
I was too busy winding the clock.
City's misfortune. This is Charlie, who lived from 72 to 90. These are his antlers all on one display board. Charlie died because people were complaining about his looks. As you can see, he didn't look very good. So we finally had to put him down. Didn't want to shoot him, so we had a vet come in and gave him a shot and put him down. I'd rather he walked around for a couple hours. I'd rather we'd done something differently, but everybody knows who Charlie was if they were around back in the 90s, because he was very friendly when he was around, all the other deer around. Go ahead. Deer, Canadian geese, ducks, fish, squirrels, baby geese.
And Cassidy.
That's my niece Cassidy.
Cassidy, is that the one where they were chasing her or
Yep.
something?
Yeah.
That was a fawn that somebody, the sheriff's department brought it over to the Waterworks. Somebody had hit the mother in a field. We knew it didn't have a mother, so they brought it over to us thinking we could take care of it. We tried, along with my sister, and we ended up taking this fawn over to Fabius as a rehabilitator. She rehabilitates them and then lets them go. That's why you shouldn't try to raise an animal, because it'll become domesticated. Go ahead. That's me in my meter room with my mother back in when I was still working back in the 90s. Plant number 1 sign that sits out front. Those are the tanks that we used when we tested meters for calibration. That was the tanks that was in the meter room. We could test meters right on site to make sure that they were measuring the right amount of water. That is, if you remember Johnny Ryan was an Olympic, he ran with the torch. He stopped at the Waterworks one day, that's the Olympic torch that he stopped over at the Waterworks. He took a picture of me with the torch. This is a guy named Cliff Palmer. He was the first guy, Cliff Palmer, we're proud to have this located at the place. The Men's Garden Club put that over there for in his memory. He did a lot of the gardening work over at the Waterworks during the 50s and 60s under Danny's leadership. We were featured in the magazine, The Water and Sewage Work, The Christmas, back in 1954. Like I said earlier, one of the things about the Waterworks, it's more than just a utility company. They've always tried to do things that, rather than just take your money, we tried to do things over there to make it a more pleasant place. At one time it was called Waterworks Park. These are some people, if you remember, we used to have the nativity set out front on the front lawn. It was donated by the Kiwanis Club in 1952. We had a little controversy back in the 70s of whether or not the nativity should be seen, not seen. Parts would disappear, we'd find them someplace else. We got in a little trouble with the ACLU, but we got by all that. But this kind of fell apart, so we don't put it outside anymore, obviously. This is the old picture in '56 when the deer were on the other side. The nativity set was on the other side. That's an early picture, probably back in 1956 or so, when we were able to put a cross up here, and there was also a cross on the nativity set. That's a 1957 picture. These are just, that's the first picture in 1949 of the Christmas. That's the creche that was outside. One of the things that we pump about 2.5 million gallons of water a day to the residents of the city. When Buckby Mears was here, they took about 1 million gallons of water a day. That's why you see water in the pond today. Back when I was still working back in the 90s, because we were pumping so much water, the pond would go dry in the summer. I've been retired 15 years. The pond has only gone dry like 2 years ago, which is when they put all the rocks in there because it looked so bad. It wasn't exactly the best thing to do, but they had rocks, so they put them in there to try to make it look a little better.
And there's the tree on the pond.
Yes, the
I
tree
love
out in the
that.
pond. That's an actual tree that one time they just had a maypole with lights on it.
I like that.
1991, picture of the Christmas. New tree that was put in 1992 by the Sweeney family. We got it off the road. This one has been taken down also since then because it just got too big. We always intended to try to trim it and keep it pruned, but they got away from us so that they were bigger than the building. Christmas pictures. Hanging Christmas decorations. These were made a long, long time ago. I try to keep, there's very, very few things that are there. The fireplace is no longer the original fireplace. We had it built. The sleigh that's there is an original sleigh. If anybody knows of anybody that's got a nice sleigh, we could use a nice sleigh at the Waterworks. We have to rebuild the one we got. We're kind of careful with it because it is, it's an actual sleigh, a one-horse sleigh that was made in Binghamton, New York. It works. People have taken it and taken it down Broadway, and we found it over in back of one of the dorms. It does move. These are the two people that played Santa Claus for us for many years over at the Waterworks. Some more updated photos by Duke Glover, who's a retired fireman. Okay. Any questions on... I find to limit myself. I'm over a little bit now, but there's a lot to talk about, which I didn't get into, but the Waterworks has always been kind of a special place in Cortland. Just because, like I said, it's more than a utility company. You see families over there with their kids. Right now we have a small herd of deer, kind of a large herd of deer, that we're managing. Paul Sandy from the police department manages the herd now, since the water board went out of business. If Paul didn't take it over, my guess is the city probably would have just said no more deer. We're doing some improvements over there to try to make it, because our fence is supposed to be 8 foot high. They just put some extenders out back. We get cited every year because the fence, the DEC will tell you if you either have deer inside or outside, the fence should be 8 feet high. It's only 7 feet out in the front area.
It's very beautiful at Christmas time though over there.
Why did the city take over the operation?
The city took over the operation around 2001. There were a lot of contributing factors. The water board was always able to do things in the city for the best of the interest of the people. One of the last things was the water board was going to put fluoride in the water. The health department recommended the fluoride be put in the water. The people do not want fluoride in the water. The alderman spoke, And that's when they went ahead, and the only way that the city could take over the water board was to go to the state legislature and rescind the law that was put into effect back in 1910, and that's what they did. So they now run the water department. The DPW, the water department, public safety are all kind of one conglomeration now. I won't say it's for the benefit of the community, but it is what it is. The water board fought for years to keep it separate, out of politics. Finally, the politics of fluoride and some of the other things that we were doing at the time got bigger than the city wanted to deal with. So they took it over and think they can run it better. Yes.
Who feeds the deer and animals,
I do.
and where does the money come from to feed them?
I feed the animals every other day about 200 pounds of corn. Paul has instituted, if anybody has cans, recyclables, there's a pallet, a container over at the Waterworks just inside the fence. When you go out back, you can put the cans and the bottles in there.
Oh, good.
He's been able to raise enough money to do a lot more of improvements. We're in hopes of planting some more trees in there, which hasn't been done. We planted trees back to the blowdown back in 1986, but if you remember, we've had a lot of flooding, so the berm that they put in over there took out a good strip of the trees that we planted to try to reforest. They really need to reforest because the trees that are there are pine and white pine and they're falling apart.
Don't the deer eat the small trees when you plant them?
They would. They get fed not our deer. We do have a population of wild deer out back. They're not our deer. Deer that you see over on the side streets or on 281, you may see a deer out in the road. Our deer are within a fence. They are controlled by the New York State Department of Agriculture. The deer would eat them. We would have to fence them in. That's what we did with the trees that are out there right now. They were completely fenced in for 20 years before we let the deer in.
How many are there in the herd?
We have about 40 deer right now.
Wow.
Do you still go up and get the cabbage? I thought at one time.
No, Don's out of business. I don't go up and pick up cabbage anymore.
All right.
Cabbage, pumpkins, people ask me what to feed them this time of year. Pumpkins are great. They love the pumpkins. Cabbage is very healthy. The lettuce is like taking a drink of water. Any kind of vegetables other than if they're hot peppers or anything, they love vegetables, potatoes. We discourage people from bringing garbage over there, which they did for a long time. We also discourage people from feeding them bread. It's not going to kill them, but it's not healthy for them. They're not used to eating bread. So we feed them today corn and a mix of oats and corn. Like I said, I put 200 pounds out about every other day with the deer that we have. So they're well taken care of, yes.
How did the deer get started in the
The
waterworks?
deer got started probably back 70 years ago. It was a fenced-in area because it was the aquifer. Somebody asked me that question. I wasn't there, but somebody brought a deer in. They put him in there. Then they had 2 deer. Then they had 3 deer. It was just something. It was an enclosed area with a fence around it. So if somebody at one time back in the 50s and 60s, they had a small petting zoo. They had raccoons. They had a peacock over there. They had a monkey. They were in cages, but that became a health problem. The only thing we have now are deer. We used to stock it with trout from the fish hatchery. They did that for the water fair every year. They would come in and stock 15, 20, 25. They say they don't do it anymore. I would rather think that the guy that used to do it, his name was Dale. He worked there for 45 years. He retired. My guess is they just didn't want to be bothered bringing the fish over anymore. Paul has put some fish in there. They're pretty hard to see. I'm over there all the time. I don't see very many trout that have been stocked in the pond.
The water board in Cortland, or at least Danny Houlihan, I think, was responsible for the animals that were displayed at New York Park.
Well, there were deer up there. They
In the
used to bring
woodlot, but the dogs barked and harassed the animals, so they stopped doing it.
Well, that was one of the problems with Dawn was raised with a dog. So people would come over with their dog and I'd say, please don't bring your dog. Somebody stole the sign that I had inside the deer fence that said, no dogs allowed. They went in and stole the sign. I've got a couple more, but people bring their dogs. I was over there with my niece a few years ago out front, and they didn't know I worked there. And I said, you walk in there with that dog, he's going to bark, the deer are all going to take off. Why are you being so tough on me? I didn't tell her I worked there, so she walked in, dog barked once, deer took off, she came back out. Didn't I tell you? Threw the bread down and says, I'm never coming back. I said, well, I wish you'd said that before you went in there.
Good.
Dogs and deer are natural enemies. They don't like each other. My dog that I had, if I put him in there, he would run and chase a deer till the deer fell down. I've got pictures of a deer that was attacked by a dog over on Glen Street. Not a pretty sight. All they're trying to do is kill it. They don't do much more, but dogs and deer don't like each other. People say, well, my dog wouldn't bother a deer. I said, any dog wouldn't bother it depending on the size of it, but dogs and deer are just natural enemies. They don't like each other.
What are the meters there?
The meters that are here, glad you asked that, Mary. When I retired, or when we stopped, I read meters for 25 years. I went in everybody's house in the city and flipped the meter to read the meters in the basements. Today the meters are all on the outside. They're not on the outside. There's an electronic device that they can be read from the outside, but the meters all went to be plastic. These were brass. The whole meter was made out of brass. Back when we started taking brass meters out, we had big boxes out back. My goal was to, if you can see, everybody can take one of these or take two of them if you want. I've got lots of them. I took all the meters apart. The unique part about these meters is it has Cortland Water Board stamped in the tops. You're never going to see that again. The meters became plastic. I took them all apart thinking I could raise some money for the deer feed, for the flowers, whatever. Well, my boss wanted to get involved, and I said, nah, I really don't want to have a corporation here with meter tops, whatever.
Yeah.
So I retired in 2001. The boxes were still over there. They wanted to know if I still wanted the 500 or 600 or 700 meter box caps that I got, so I got these at home. I like to make, these were all pictures of something that happened over at the Waterworks. But to me, the most important thing, and I'm not going to say, Bud Ames, this might be your meter. It would be more like winning the lottery than to say this meter came out of your house. But I flipped these tops on these meters for 25 years before we went to a different route. So feel free to take them. I gave them away. I was down to the antique place down in Polkville one day, and on the counter was a meter top. And she was selling it for $10, $15, $20.
Oh my.
It came from me originally. That wasn't my intent, but somebody got it, and they are antiques. You know, that's one thing. I used to see them in trade magazines where you would see it on a piece of wood, and people used them for coin collectors. You put your money in them. That's not where I got the idea. My idea was just that why throw them away when, and I can honestly say today, I worked for the Cortland Water Board. The Cortland Water Board went out of business the day I retired. Not because I retired. It didn't quite come out the way I wanted it to. My last day working for the Water Board is when the city took over the Water Board, and I was very thankful for that. It wasn't planned that way, but that's just the way that worked out. They did hire me back. I do get a stipend to go over there and do what I do. I don't do it for free. I was asked a few years ago if I would volunteer my time. No. I'll be there, but I won't volunteer my time and not get anything.
Good.
So the more I work, the less I get. You know, I enjoy doing what I do. Like I said, feel free. And there are people want to know some of the the commissioners and the superintendents of the water board. It's a who's who of who is in Cortland except for Bud. I don't know how Bud is dead.
I was chairman of the DPW at the time.
You're right. We don't mix well together. I have to brag a little bit because one of the things I'm most proud of, the plaque that you saw for Danny in 1971 was put up. It was a little controversial because then everybody wanted a plaque. When I retired in 2001, a plaque was put in my memory at the Waterworks on front of the building.
Yep.
It's not in my memory. People said, well, it sounds like you're dead, Mike.
Honor, in your honor.
Right?
I have been fortunate that I had the connection with Danny. I didn't get the job because of Danny. Danny died the year before. I went over there one day with my mother because she was married to Danny and she knew the guys over there when they had the flood back in 1972 in Corning. My mother went over there to see if she could borrow a pump because my uncle's house was water up to the second floor. They got us a pump, and at that time they just said, Mike, you interested in the job? Well, yeah, apply for being a meter reader. So the following December I was hired by Grove Eaton, who took over for Danny.
Are any of the Houlihan's alive yet?
Yes.
Ann used to live
Danny
in Tennessee.
Jr.'s alive, Ann's alive, both the boys are gone, I think.
And
Ann died?
Danny was a really tough person, but Danny did a lot of good things for a lot of people. I worked with people that would say bad things about Danny. And those are the people that Danny helped out the most. Danny had a heart of gold and he would do anything for anybody. He got a bad rep because he was in charge and he ran it with an iron fist. That's one of the problems we've had over the last few years. Not downplaying anybody that ran it, but the people that were in charge had to answer to the politicians. More and more as it went along, they just had to, the politicians made them jump and they said, how high? There were things that we did that they didn't like, but we did it keeping the price down and keeping a good quality of water.
You do the tree planting in the city of Cortland also?
Yes.
I'm assistant, yes. I'm chairman of the Landscape and Design Commission.
It's quite impressive what has happened
Yeah.
trees in the city.
He's
What's
done
that?
It's quite impressive what has happened with trees in the city.
We're trying.
20
That's
years
him.
ago, I counted the old dead maple trees on Pomeroy Street, because I was interested in them, and there might have been 10 or 12 old dead ones there. And they're all gone now, and there's probably 50 trees on Pomeroy Street, ranging in size from 2-inch to
Yep.
12-inch.
We're trying. Our biggest problem is the city getting away from is that the city has the right of way from the street, 25 feet off the center of the street, but you can't make people plant a tree in front of their house. So people have to step forward, and if you want people that are going to take care of their trees, that's the biggest thing, is they plant a tree, you want them to take care of it. So planting a tree in front of somebody's house that doesn't want it, the tree is probably not going to survive. We plant an average of 60 to 70 trees a year. We lose a few trees every year, like you said, the trees that are coming down. South Church Street, we just took down the old evergreens that are there. We're in hopes of planting next year, we're going to plant some conifers. Our biggest problem is not having a guard dog out there, because they will be nice Christmas trees.
That's right.
We've had that happen before in the city, where they take the top off a tree and use it for a Christmas tree and leave the bottom of the tree.
People don't want to cut trees down, but then they get too big and
Well, one of the things with the trees is Niagara Mohawk used to have utility crews in Cortland County that would trim trees every year, every 2 years. They don't do that anymore. They hire out their tree trimming to a private, and they work exclusively for National Grid. The guy that I work with exclusively at National Grid, Jim Maloney, he's an arborist. It's a catch-22 for him, because he has to keep the power on, but he also has to make sure the trees don't affect the power. The wires that are going through the trees. So he's been very kind to us, trying to not trim them like they used to trim the hole in the middle. Topping a tree is basically illegal today. Nobody takes the top out of a tree. That will kill it quicker than anything other than a lawnmower or a weed eater.
Who decides which trees are cut?
The DPW will go around if there's safety issues, if they become dead. A lot of the old trees, for a long time, they weren't really being replaced. So a lot of the stock that's in the city, they're 70, 80 years old, and their lifespan is about that long. So the DPW will look at them. Niagara Mohawk will look at them for power lines and trim them, but DPW will look at safety of trees that are dead, dying, diseased, that need to come down. Our problem is, I've had people before, we'll take your tree down if you get a new tree. Next year comes, I don't want a tree. You took my tree down, but I don't want another tree.
It might help to explain to them that the short trees are on the side of the street where the wires are, and the taller trees.
That's one
are-
thing that we've been doing over the last 10 years is trees used to be planted no matter what the size was on both sides of the street. That's a problem for National Grid, because the trees get too big, then that's when they have to trim them. So right now we're planting small trees which fit into their 10,000 tree program, and planting small trees on the under the wires. They give us back $50 every tree for a tree that they find acceptable underneath their wires. The other side of the street, we try to plant big trees. We planted oak trees, we planted elm trees, we got a new breed. We just planted a whole bunch of new trees in Courthouse Park. The trees that were there, if you remember, they were all died to the Dutch elm disease many years ago. We planted a new species of elm tree in Courthouse Park. Pendleton Hill, we're going to be planting more trees going up Pendleton Hill this summer. By the Housing Authority up to the high school. We're going to plant 30 or 40 trees going up to the high school.
Oh, good.
You put them on the corner of Huntington and Pendleton Street.
We planted there for one, that's
Yeah.
half the trees that we planted over the last 2 years have to be in a floodplain, designated floodplain, which means they get a lot of water. The grant that we got said half the trees that we plant have to go into the floodplain. So we were able to plant trees down by Quebeco down on Pendleton Street. That's why we're planting them on Pendleton Hill. That's a floodplain.
Oh.
Not many people know too much about Perplexity Creek, which ran through Wickwire property, which overflowed, which was a burr in my mother's side when she was on the Common Council. She had two issues, one Perplexity Creek and one the city dump that was where the Board of Education building is. She was up there once a week putting fires out, and I'm diversing a little bit away from what I was here for. But I hope you all find it interesting. I really like working there. The ladder's getting a little bit heavy. So we'll see what happens down the road.
I know.